Hello everyone, welcome to my review of the big crossover event for the 4 CW Comic Book Hero television series. So for this week, I decided to do something different. Typically, I do reviews for each individual episode for the various comic book television series, specifically the ones on the CW. But for this week, they decided to have a really big crossover event. So I decided that I would compile all of my reviews into one big video because I felt that it would be much easier for me to just talk about all the events all at once and not have to pair them off into each individual review. Overall, I have to say, I very much enjoyed this crossover. But before I delve too much into it, I just want to say that I will be doing kind of episode-by-episode reviews just to keep some type of format with this. And first of all, I want to start out with kind of the odd episode out when it comes to the mix, and that is Supergirl. The Supergirl episode is episode 8, titled Medusa. And for this episode, we get a kind of standalone episode for Supergirl, and there's really just a kind of crossover tie-in in the very end. But I thought it was a very good episode of Supergirl. I very much enjoyed it. There were a few little problems I had with it, but I'll first start with the positives. I really like that we got to see Alex and Kara's mom more involved with the show. We got to see kind of her medical and scientific expertise be used with the DEO, which was very nice to see, and it also led to a very nice, very touching, very heartwarming scene between Alex and her mother, because out of all of the kind of people in her close personal life that she has come out to, her mother hasn't been one of them yet. So it was a nice scene to see both of them really connect with one another, because they really don't feature her mother very often in the show. The reason why her mother was in this specific episode, because Cadmus has decided to unleash this Medusa virus. And this Medusa virus attacks specifically aliens and is kind of like a chemical weapon to wipe out large amounts of aliens, which is a really interesting thing. Cadmus is very much hell-bent on eliminating aliens, but while this Medusa virus is unleashed, or even threatened to be unleashed to a larger populace, there is some other things going on. John Jones is exceedingly being more and more corrupt or poisoned by the white Martian blood, and he is turning into a white Martian very quickly, very swiftly. It's very interesting when we saw at the end of the episode where he morphed into his Martian form. He's kind of a combination of like Green Martian and White Martian. Also, we got to see more of Cyborg Superman, who I really don't particularly like, because he's essentially just Cyborg Hank Henshaw, but with Superman's powers, and for some reason, somehow, Cadmus knows how to get into the Fortress of Solitude, as well as the location of the Fortress of Solitude, which I thought was relatively secret, and also relatively very difficult to enter, but they were apparently able to do it relatively easily. Why do they specifically need Kara's blood in order to access whatever codex that is at the Fortress of Solitude? Because would that mean that Superman would have to use his own blood or something like that? It's an interesting override mechanism for the Fortress of Solitude that I thought was really lazily written into the episode, but that's just a small nitpick. Also, in the end of the episode, they were able to develop some type of serum in order to fix John Jones's white Martian blood poisoning, which I thought was also a quick fix to I thought would be a much larger, complex problem. But what I did really like in the episode is we got to see Lena Luthor kind of pull a fast one on, I think, both us as an audience and her mother, who is running Cadmus. I thought initially in this episode we were getting the big reveal that Lena Luthor is really bad, kind of like her brother Lex, and that she was indeed going to join forces with her mother and try to kill aliens. But in the end, she pulls a fast one and decides to make the Medusa virus inert. Granted, I probably should have saw that coming, but unfortunately I didn't. Like I said, the big kind of connecting tissue between Supergirl and the rest of the crossover is at the end of the episode, Barry and Cisco show up and they need Supergirl's help, and she is readily wanting to help them, no questions asked, seemingly. And that is when we get into the Flash episode. Is the 8th episode of the 3rd season. It is titled Invasion. Coincidentally, the episodes of The Flash, Arrow, and Legends of Tomorrow are all titled Invasion. But it is this episode that we see the initial invasion of the aliens. This is very much the beginning episode of the major crossover. In this episode, we get the invasion of the Dominators. They come down, they crash land, and they run around and start doing all kinds of stuff. But mostly they're here to do reconnaissance work for a larger plan that they have. A larger, more sinister plan that they have. And in this episode, we see kind of the first response or first actions of the people in the Arrowverse. We see Barry and Team Flash right away start to coordinate to figure things out. We see them right away understanding the situation that they do need help. They need to gather all of their heroic friends in order to take on this larger thing. In this episode is where we get to see everyone starting to come together. Barry goes to get Oliver Queen, as well as contact the Legends of Tomorrow people, and they all come together in this episode to address this alien situation. And I thought it was so awesome seeing all of these characters come together. For me, it felt so natural, so seamless, so proper. Like, this makes sense that all these characters exist in this world, and it really puts into perspective how really large this world is that they've created. And now with the addition of Supergirl, it's even larger. I thought it was very interesting in this episode that we finally found out which Earth that Supergirl actually exists on, and it is Earth 38. And that is fascinating to me just because now they are able to actually get to that Earth and contact Supergirl. But the biggest revelation in this episode is that, once again, the Flashpoint plotline or the Flashpoint storyline is coming into play. Barry now has to reveal to the larger group of people that he in fact went back in time and changed the timeline, and that things are changed. Also, it seems that this changing of the timeline is perhaps why the Dominators are here now. So Barry has to deal with kind of all of these problems, and that also leads to another kind of time problem as well, and that is with Dr. Stein. If you've been watching Legends of Tomorrow, which I unfortunately don't do the episode reviews for, simply because I don't have time, is that he's starting to get flashes and memories of someone he doesn't know, but he's starting to get all of these feelings that these memories elicit. And what we find out in this episode is that it is a daughter that he now has. A daughter he did not have before, he was not aware of. And it's really, really interesting that that particular time wrinkle had nothing to do with Barry whatsoever. That was specifically what he did in Legends of Tomorrow. And it is very interesting now that he has to deal with that on a personal level. Because to him, it's not a daughter, it's a time aberration. It's something that shouldn't exist, but does exist because of him. And what they are really trying to do on Legends of Tomorrow is to make sure the timeline doesn't get screwed up. It's kind of interesting that they didn't notice that Barry was screwing with the timeline, but that's a discussion for a different time. So with all of these heroes gathered together, they all start training for this big battle, and it's really interesting to see that they decide to use Supergirl as kind of a training tool, because she is an alien. She has these alien type powers, and so they're trying to train with her, and it's so obvious how much stronger and how much different she is than everyone else in the Arrow universe. It also really goes to show how different the worlds are between the Supergirl world and the world we see on Earth 1. We also got to see something that I wasn't quite expecting, is that they all essentially got corrupted or brainwashed and turned into the evil forms of themselves. And it was up to Barry and Oliver to try to fix the situation. We got a really, really cool action sequence at the end of this episode, and it was really cool to see all of these good guys essentially fighting one another. But at the end of this episode, at the very end of this episode, is that we see that certain members of the team are being abducted by these aliens, and what does that lead to? And that brings me to the Arrow episode, and the Arrow episode is also the 100th episode of Arrow. Most of the episode has to do with Oliver, Diggle, Thea, Sarah, and Ray all being abducted, and they are kind of in these dreamlike world. They're kind of in this suspended animation where they're living out kind of an alternate life where Oliver and Sarah didn't get on the boat. He didn't become Green Arrow. She didn't become Black Canary. Oliver is marrying Laurel. Diggle and Felicity never met Oliver. It's really this kind of idealistic world that Oliver could have had things gone differently, which I thought was really, really fascinating. It was really a great retrospective of the entire show. You saw a lot of characters you haven't seen in quite some time. You saw Oliver and Thea's mother, their father. You even got to see a little bit of Tommy Merlin as well. And it was a wonderful, kind of heartwarming episode. And ultimately, in the end of the episode, we got to see Oliver saying goodbye. But he wasn't saying goodbye specifically to the individuals he was saying goodbye to. He was saying goodbye to the life he could have had but never can have. And it was really interesting to see that much characterness in this kind of crossover. Out of all of the episodes, I think this one was the most well done. I think it had the most richness of character and was really, could be argued that is the best. In the episode, you kind of had a side plot that had to deal with Team Arrow and getting some type of technology together in order to hack into the alien tech in order to find where these people had been abducted to. It was really interesting that they were being taken into outer space, and I really liked at the end of the episode where they had to have this grand kind of escape from the Dominator ship. It felt very sci-fi. It felt very different than what we see in a typical Arrow episode. I think with this crossover, we're seeing things that they have really never introduced before, and I think the world is responding well to it. I think we're seeing very comic book type things, and it is working very, very well within the show's structures. Which brings me to probably the most comic booky of all of these CW shows, and that is Legends of Tomorrow. In this episode, they decide to go back in time to, I believe, 1951, to where the Dominators first came here, and abduct one and learn from it, essentially. And what is really interesting when it comes to Legends of Tomorrow is that it deals with time travel a lot. Really curious that if you watch The Flash, you know that traveling through time is really, really messy. And in Legends of Tomorrow, they do a lot of messy things, but you kind of have to, I guess, suspend your disbelief because it is a very entertaining show. And in this episode, it is the grand finale of this big crossover event, and I really, really liked it as well. I like Legends of Tomorrow from a comic book fan's perspective, because each episode feels like a comic book show, a comic book come to life, and this episode was no exception. There was some really nice character stuff in the episode with Dr. Stein, very much a crossover from the previous episodes as well as what is happening on Legends of Tomorrow. And in this episode, he comes to the realization that he really cares for his daughter and that he can't just eliminate her from the timeline, which is what he initially wants to do. And in this episode, he has all these parental emotions really come to life for him, and it's really interesting where that's going to go going forward. I know I don't really review the episodes, I still watch Legends of Tomorrow, so I'm very curious where that plot line goes. But in this episode, I do really like how you really needed all of the different members from each show come together and to defeat the Dominators once and for all. And they do eventually develop a device that can harm the Dominators, and what we get is a really good But although brief, great climax to this crossover event where they are fighting the Dominators on rooftops, and Supergirl and Barry are running around placing all of these devices on the different aliens. I thought for a show that is limited by budget, it was a really good climactic event. Granted, it was too brief, like I just mentioned. It was kind of maybe 5 minutes of action sequences, but it was really awesome to see all of these characters come together and fight these Dominators. I'm hoping perhaps next year they will also do a big crossover event as well. But as a comic book fan, I'll have to say I really loved seeing these characters on screen together. I really like this crossover event. I am really happy that this world on TV exists now. I'm really happy they can include someone like Supergirl, and I'm glad at the end of the episode now, Cisco gave her a device that she can use to travel and contact from her Earth to ours. And I think that is definitely a way they can connect both worlds now. So hopefully we get to see her again soon. So this has been my review of the Grand CW comic book television series crossover event, Heroes vs. Aliens. If you like this video, please check out my episode reviews for the various television series, and also a few of the other videos I have up, like my movie reviews as well.